So my name's Peter, I live in Somerset, and Daniel asked me if I'd say a few things about containers, because I've been using containers of all kinds for an awful lot of years, about 60 years since I had my first garden, and I use all sorts of junk and all sorts of things, some of which I pay for. Actually, I don't think it must be years since I paid for a container, but anyway, I do normally, or in many years, I use these sort of containers, ordinary trays to sow my seedlings in. And then I either prick them out straight from there or move them out straight out of there into the garden, or I move them into other pots. But I also use these sorts of things that you find often in people's recycling or their rubbish. People buy these are bedding plant container, and so in spring you get dozens of these. Obviously people have bought bedding plants and then they throw these away. So if you keep your eye out for them, you'll find them all over the place. And then I use these too, mushroom containers, which in my case are outside the back of the veg shop. This is a box. I particularly use these for beans. So I sow my beans about now, which is middle of April, I line it with a bit of newspaper and that comes up the edge to keep the soil in, and then sow the beans straight into that, and then plant the beans off straight into the garden. It means I can be slightly more ahead, and it means I'm not risking sowing them straight in the ground when they might get a frost or get battered around by the wind. So those are easy to get too. And then there's a couple of other things. This is a tree guard, which you can split, sort of cut a bit off with a knife, or a Stanley knife, or a pen knife. So effectively you end up with a bit of gutter. And a bit of gutter would do just as well, or does do just as well. And of course, skips are a fantastic place for bits of gutter. And then what you do is put the soil down the inside of your bit of gutter, probably about half this length, so about a metre long bit of gutter. And then you can sow particularly peas and beans straight into the gutter. And then this is just to get yourself a bit ahead of time. And then when you want to plant them out, you dig a bit of a ditch and then sort of just wiggle it a bit and push them straight out. So that way you don't disturb the roots when you're planting them out. And then the other final thing I wanted to show you is something I haven't done before, but I suddenly realised that these tetra packs make fantastic pots. So especially if you squash them first. So you squash them first. It's like Blue Peter, isn't it? Here's one I made earlier. Actually, I can do that in a minute. So you cut the top off, and then you can just do a little snip, snip. I normally do these with a pair of scissors. Doesn't have to be a secateurs. Snip, snip, and make two little nicks at the bottom. And then that's actually a sort of completely waterproof, lined pot. So I've got a whole tray of them there, which I'm about to fill up. And then I'm going to sow. This is for somebody who wants a lot of squash. So I'm going to sow squash seeds direct into those, and then when they're a decent size, they'll go straight from there into planting. So here's some I did earlier. So this is a couple of, actually two little courgettes. So in that case, I've sown the courgettes in a pot, in somewhere warm, and then when they've got going a little bit, when they're just up, I've transplanted them off into these, with a mixture of just ordinary compost that I bought for 99p from Lidl's, and a little bit of my garden. And then they'll grow on until they're about that size, and then ready to transplant out. Because again, it's too early to sow things out in the garden, or if it's too risky putting something like courgette, because we're still getting cold nights, and we still might get frosts, and then you'd lose the lot. Okay, so these containers would also be perfect for things like herbs. So if you wanted to sow some parsley, basil, that sort of herb, you could sow them into these pots, and then when you've got a good lot of them, prick them out. I'll talk about pricking out later, but you could then move them out, so put a couple into each pot, and then just grow them along your windowsill, or if you've got a balcony, grow them along a balcony, because they don't need a lot of soil. Something like parsley really doesn't need a lot of soil, or basil for that much. So you could use these to grow particularly herbs. Beans, they're possibly not quite big enough, but with a French bean, if you just had one plant in each one, you could definitely grow them. Climbing beans, you might need a bit more soil than that. You might need something a bit bigger, something else that you've nicked out of someone's recycling. So the next short video we're going to do is about compost. There's lots of ways that you can do that, and it really doesn't have to be that complicated. But if you've got any space at all, even a balcony, the potential for compost is great, because otherwise you're letting the fertility that's in your household leave. And what all this is about is keeping fertility within your own patch, so that you're not buying in stuff all the time.